Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive paradigm shift about where modern thought actually comes from. We'll be unpacking some incredible source material that completely flips history on its head, focusing on the Eastern origins of Western modernity and this really fascinating concept called autogeneous modernity.
We usually just assume that the Enlightenment, modern capitalism, the whole foundation of civil society, we assume it's all purely European, right? That's the standard textbook story. But what if those foundational ideas actually have hidden Eastern roots? What if the spark that lit the modern world didn't just spontaneously happen in Europe?
To figure that out, we're going to cover four main things today. First, the Eastern origins of Western modernity. Second, the massive China craze that swept through Europe. Third, we'll look at Donghak thought and Korea's autogenous modernity. And finally, a future paradigm based on empathy and reflection. All right, let's jump right into part one, challenging the Eurocentric view and uncovering the Eastern origins of Western modernity. So, we're going to look at the actual historical evidence here, and it is pretty mind-blowing. Recent academic research strongly suggests that the core pillars of modern Western thought weren't just created in a vacuum. They were heavily inspired by the East. Enlightenment thinkers didn't just invent these ideas out of nowhere. They were actively studying Eastern concepts and using them to build the very foundation of Western modernity. Picture 17th and 18th century Europe for a second. The whole continent is literally tearing itself apart over religious wars. It's chaotic. And then, suddenly, information starts pouring in about this highly moral, highly functioning Chinese civilization that is operating entirely without Western religion. It was an absolute shock to the system. Discovering that a society could have strict morality without the Catholic Church forced European intellectuals to radically rethink what they believed about universality. Which brings us to our second point, the flow of ideas and the China craze that totally swept through Europe. The ultimate game changer here was the Jesuit missionary Matteo Ricci. His introduction of Chinese ideology into Europe acted like a giant catalyst. He brought over texts and concepts that directly shaped the era's core ideas. From there, the big names of the Enlightenment, people we all know like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Adam Smith, they actively adopted these Eastern concepts, using them as the literal bedrock for their own revolutionary claims about economics and society. Let's put that into perspective. Take Adam Smith's famous invisible hand, basically the foundation of modern capitalism. That was deeply inspired by Chinese secular rational traditions. And Rousseau's theory of natural rights, he drew heavy inspiration from the egalitarian setup of Chinese civil service exams, where your merit dictated your position, not just who your parents were. It's amazing to see how intertwined our global intellectual history really is. And this east-to-west flow of knowledge wasn't a secret back then. It's perfectly captured in what's known as the Seahawk Central Theory, which is the idea that the true origins of Western learning actually began in China. This was deeply studied and developed by brilliant Korean scholars like Seo Myung-eung, who totally recognized the cyclical flow of these global ideas. Okay, let's pivot to section 3 and look at Korea specifically, Donghak thought and autogenous modernity. So, what exactly is autonomous modernity? Basically, it's a self-generated, independent evolution of modern thought and civil society that sprouts naturally from within Eastern traditions. This is a huge deal because it completely shatters the old limits set by Western sociologists like Max Weber, who wrongly claimed that Eastern societies just didn't have the internal mechanism to build modern civil societies on their own. But the historical evidence says otherwise. The primary academic proof for this self-generated modernity in Korea is anchored right in Donghak thoughts and the rapid internal evolution of Korean Neo-Confucianism. It proves, without a doubt, that the seeds of modernity were already growing organically from within. Let's break down what made Donghak so unique. A huge pillar of it is the concept of kabek again, which essentially means a great opening or a total recreation of the world. This thought system indirectly expresses those Eastern origins of modernity we were just talking about. In practice, Donghak acted almost like a religious and social reformation of Neo-Confucianism. It's actually fascinating. It shares structural similarities with the Protestant Reformation in the West, but it keeps its distinctly Eastern philosophical roots. When you compare the standard Western model of civil society with Joseon civil society, the recent research reveals something incredible. Because of this autonomous development, Joseon society actually had civil society elements, think localized scholarly networks and mutual aid systems, that were arguably even stronger and more deeply integrated than what was happening in the West at the exact same time.
Now for our final section, how a future paradigm of empathy and reflection can help solve our modern crisis.
Why does all this historical analysis actually matter for us today? Well, look at the world right now. Western modernity undeniably brought massive technological and economic progress, but it came with a massive price tag. We are facing a global crisis of extreme materialism and just widespread human alienation. We are more technologically connected than ever, yet somehow we feel completely isolated. The source material points to a really compelling cure for this. The path forward lies in the core keywords of Eastern autogenous modernity: empathy and reflection. And these aren't just feel-good buzzwords. They are robust, practical frameworks for restructuring how our society operates. If we trace this back to the 18th century, thinkers like David Hume and Adam Smith were already adopting the Confucian concept of empathy, thanks to Matteo Ricci, and using it as a brand new foundation for Western moral theory. Empathy is still crucial today. But if we look to the future, the Eastern paradigm tells us that empathy alone just isn't enough anymore. We have to intentionally combine it with deep, systemic reflection. Basically, empathy plus reflection equals true significance. Eastern modernity places a massive emphasis on this idea of reflective modernity. It argues that having empathy for others only hits its true society-changing potential when you pair it with deep structural reflection on our actions, our communities, and our whole relationship with the natural world. And this isn't just some abstract theory. You can see it in action. The rapid, highly structured economic and social development of modern East Asia is living proof of the power of this Eastern modernity. It shows that a society absolutely can modernize and thrive economically while still keeping a cultural bedrock of collective empathy and reflective social obligation. It's a totally viable alternative for our postmodern era. As the research powerfully concludes, it is time to re-examine the integrated modernity of Eastern and Western cultures as a new paradigm to solve the crisis of civilization. We don't have to reject the West or overly romanticize the East. Instead, we need an integrated modernity, taking the absolute best, most sustainable elements of both sides to find a new way forward. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on as we wrap up this explainer. How can we, in our own everyday lives, our workplaces, and our communities, practically apply this self-generated Eastern paradigm of empathy and deep reflection? How can we use these ancient yet incredibly relevant tools to actively heal the alienation in our society today? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Keep reflecting and keep learning.